Okay. Lesson 4, leadership styles. So, objectives, we should be able to describe how to identify the willingness and readiness of team members, identify three different styles of leadership, choose the most effective leadership style for various situations, and define vocab. So, um, one important thing when deciding, what kind of leadership style you want to do is kind of evaluating like team willingness. So, people's excitement uh, or motivation to do something. And as you can see in the graph, it's kind of silly, but basically, the more willing someone is, the less support they need or that you need to give them. Yeah, not as much as you should give them. You should give people support no matter what. So there really shouldn't be like a zero on this graph, but it's just like a visual to help you understand better. So here's an example. So we have two people in the team. We have Bob and we have Rob. And so, for example, if the team objective is to, like imagine we're in Raiders and we're running around Lake Merced, right? So one person is tired, they're not motivated, and they're struggling to keep going, and then one person's doing well, they're not showing any signs of distress, but maybe I like them more, right? So who am I going to support more? Who am I going to pay attention to more? Colonel, can you give me a number between 1 and 11?
7.
Okay. Ben, can you tell me? Or yeah, who in this situation would you support more or pay attention to more?
Bob, because he needs to be motivated like Rob.
Yes. And another factor you need to do, there's team willingness and then there's team readiness. So oh, someone in the chat. Oh, okay, Earl.
Okay, Alfred's late to class and he's in the waiting room right now. So
Um, okay, I'll text Linda on Messenger. There's nothing I can do because I don't think I'm co-host right now.
thank you.
Okay, I did it. So,
Let me ask you a question while
yes.
you're doing that. Um, which group of theories does this idea of fall under? Remember, we talked about trait theory, situational. What was the last group we talked about? Does anybody remember the most recent kind of thinking about leadership? It was called what? Does anybody remember that?
Contingency.
What's that?
I have no idea actually.
So you did, I thought you said it.
Oh yeah, contingency probably. I don't know.
Yeah, that's correct. You do have an idea.
Wow.
Contingency theories. In other words, your behavior, the leader's behavior is going to be proportional to the amount of support needed. So it's contingent upon the amount of support or the readiness of the followers. It's a contingency theory.
Yeah, as opposed to, for example, like the born traits kind of leadership idea. So another factor to consider is team readiness. So first is, how motivated someone is, and the next is, how prepared they are, or how experienced they are in a certain task. And again, this is a visual. It's not really that accurate when you consider like getting closer to zero, right? But um, here's another example. Oops, let me click on it. Um, so there's two people again, Bob and Rob, in a team, and let's say you're the leader, you're the commander of Raiders, you're leading a practice, right? And so Bob has been there for 2 years, and Rob has been there for 1 week as a trainee. Who are you going to teach more or pay attention to more in terms of uh, different customs in practice or how to do certain exercises. Obviously, Rob, right? I'm not gonna pull someone out because that one's kind of easy. Um, so now we were able to describe to how to identify the willingness and readiness of team members. Now we're going to identify three different styles of leadership. So there's we learned about autocratic, democratic, and laissez-faire kind of leadership styles, and now there's different ways of interpreting those in directing, participating, and delegating. So directing is kind of like an autocratic leadership style, participating is kind of like a democratic leadership style, and delegating is kind of like a laissez-faire kind of leadership style, like hands off. So directing. Um, hold on, let me get back to my notes. So, um, directing, whenever someone is doing like the directing kind of leadership, they're, when they're introducing the mission, they go really in depth about what it is and how they specifically want it to be done. And then after that, they'll supervise, how they want it to be done. So they're kind of, they want it done one way, a very specific way. And it's good when there's a little amount of time to complete a task, or, for example, only the leader is knowledgeable in the task. And one point about directing is, although we kind of compare it to the autocratic kind of leadership, it isn't supposed to be, kind of like mean or intimidating or yelling. Those aren't really related to it. That's not a good way to treat people, just in general. So I wanted to make that clear. The next one is participating. So this one is kind of like the democratic uh, leadership style. So you have input and advice from followers that you consider before you make a decision, and it's good for when you have competent followers. So not people that are clueless, some people that have maybe done this before and could contribute some useful ideas. And then delegating. So this is more like a laissez-faire kind of, or you can compare it to that kind of leadership style. So you're giving followers more authority and less supervision. And it's good for when you have more mature followers who can also kind of, lead themselves or maybe lead small individual groups within the entire group. But it's you have to keep in mind that no matter what, even if you're delegating mature followers, you are still responsible for whatever happens. You are accountable because you are the leader, right? You chose to, for example, do this sort of leadership style. So in that way, you are accountable.
That's hard to get your mind around sometimes. But the way to look at it is you can delegate the authority for someone to do something, but you cannot delegate the responsibility. So in other words, as a leader, you're making a judgment that when you delegate something, that the subordinate has the capability, the skills, the motivation to do that task. If you've misjudged and the task does not get done, you can't blame it on the subordinate. You still have to accept responsibility for the outcome. It's a very important concept, part of leadership that sometimes is hard to understand. Thank you.
And the next part of our objectives is we're supposed to be able to choose the most effective leadership style for various situations. So, if you go to link in chat, hold on, let's see if I memorized it. Yeah. If you just put that in your browser. And so the first question is, which leadership style would you use if you're leading a hike through the forest with team members that have never been outside of the city before? Which one out of directing, participating, and delegating? And yes, the answer is A. Hold on. You would use directing because these people aren't, they're inexperienced followers, so they aren't really competent enough to have experience to, know um, more than you do about what's happening and to give useful ideas. Of course, it's not like you have to do that in the entire time, but just in general, you would be using the directing sort of leadership approach. So now to a different example. So, um,
And just to break that out and to see how that might work. So they've never been on a hike. They've never been out of the city into the forest. So you're going to tell them things. You're going to direct them to bring uh, insect repellent, to bring sunscreen, to bring plenty of water. You're going to really be directing in and detailed. But if they had all been on hikes before, you might not have to do that. You can assume that they know enough to bring water. And we always usually cover it anyway because people forget. But that's just a detail of how that might actually work as a directing. You'd be very directive
yeah, that's a
and
good point.
specific.
So out of 11 of us, most of us think that the answer to this question is participating. So if I am the battalion commander and I want to make sure all cadets have uniforms up to a high standard, I should use participating. Um, the kind of what I was trying to go for here is kind of linking it back to the chain of command. So what I wanted was for the answer to be delegating. So I sort of I make sure that my different company commanders and their SNCOs they know what is the standards for a uniform and they can lead themselves instead of me going to every single cadet or answering their questions or making sure that those standards are upheld. So that's what I was trying to go for here. Um, as a battalion commander, of course, you're using all kinds of leadership styles, but I was just trying in this sort of example, in this sort of situation. So next one.
Now,
Uh,
let me elaborate. Let me
okay.
just go back to that for a second. Let me just give you a situation. So on the last uniform inspection, Alpha, Bravo, and Delta did really well, but Charlie didn't look so good. So in that case, the battalion commander might step back and be a little more participating when it comes to Charlie Company to help them get up to standard, find out why they didn't make the standard last time. But delegating is definitely the right answer in that regard because you assume you have 4 company commanders that have experience, they understand the standards, and you should expect them to be able to meet that standard.
Yeah, and that kind of relates back to the sort of visual where it was like experience and skills versus support, right? Where you're gonna delegate or you're going to put more of your time towards that company since they need more help.
I meant to say Delta Company. I'm just joking. I know Delta Company's squared away. So
So another situation. So let's say you're playing a backyard football game with some little cousins and they have never played football before at a family gathering. Would you do directing, participating, or delegating? So we're about 50-50. Yeah, exactly 50-50. Um, I guess you could use both, but considering, that they're little cousins and, let's say for example, you're acting as the coach, right? And you're doing different what's it called? Plays that you're drawing up, then I would say directing. But then of course they're little cousins, so you gotta listen to them. So you can ask them your like, oh, what position you want to play, right? So I think both answers are correct here. Maybe directing a little bit more, because you're the sort of authority figure. You're kind of like facilitating this entire thing. And then I have a last one. Oops, do I? Okay, well, I don't have it in here, but it was if you're going on that same hike, right, and same hike a year later with the same people you did the year before, right? The same group, but it's the same hike. Which one would you do now? Imagine that the question is different and it's what I just asked. It's the people you did before and it's the year later. Which one would you do this time? So yeah, most of us think either participating or delegating. I myself would do participating, but I'm sure, either of these two are correct as long as it isn't directing, because the point was that they're more competent now, they're more experienced in what it takes to go on a hike, especially this particular hike, right? So not directing, either two are fine. I would say participating, because they're still, the second time ever we're assuming, right? Oops, let me clear the
Just
responses.
just one
Yes.
just one wrap up comment here. Um, the decisions that a leader needs to make regarding directing, participating, or delegating are not always easy. You have to do a little bit of analysis of your followers, because if you're too directing or too delegating, you know, uh, when it doesn't need to be that way, it may be resented, or it may end up in a mission failure. So these are not easy decisions. As leaders, you have to really uh, know your subordinates and what their abilities are.
And so we have done everything here except for define vocab, and there's just 5 words here. Again, like most of the vocab in this textbook, it's self-explanatory. Um, we learned what the directing, participating, delegating was. I explained it to you. Competent is skilled, and then leadership styles are different patterns of behaviors that a leader uses to influence others. And so it's 1:31. Class ends at 1:40. So I'm done here. Um,
Let,
hmm?
let me just make a couple of comments,
Okay.
Nikolai. Um, so we've discussed some models. This model of leadership, the idea of breaking it into directing, participating, delegating. We looked at authoritarian, democratic, and laissez-faire. So we've looked at some different approaches to leadership. What I want you to understand is that any of these approaches are obviously overly simplistic. Um, and they need to be, but they help us to think about it. They help us to talk about it, to understand the concepts. So anytime you're talking about human behavior, any model that you try to apply to it is going to be overly simplistic, but it's still a useful way to help us understand and to discuss a concept. So, so that's why even when you're talking about this, there are a lot of other factors involved, not just the readiness, the willingness, and all that. There are many other factors. So it's complicated. So the point is, you, as you develop, have to kind of center on the leadership style that's most comfortable for you, but you have to be flexible too. You have to be able to adapt to various situations. Thank you.
I actually thought of one more point that I didn't bring up. So here, between directing, participating, and delegating, right? So obviously you're considering your followers, right? So we learned about different followership, like models or styles, and they were commitment versus compliance. So for something like directing, do you think your followers are ideally like more complicit or people who are committed? Or actually, what do you think relates to it more in a directing leadership style? I mean, me personally, I would say that the directing leadership style coincides with the compliance kind of like followership. So if you have people who are just, complying and doing what you tell them to, that relates to directing. And if you have something like participating or delegating, especially delegating, you have more people like commitment. So you have people who are sacrificing some time. They're really committed to whatever you're doing, the program. And I think it also a key part of the commitment was that they sort of mold to or change their own personal values to the program. And I think that goes with delegating as well. And an example of what I just mentioned, like for example, if I'm committed to football, right? Football, like it helps me learn certain things, right? It helps me um, sort of refine different values. So I become, for example, if I'm committed to football, through that I will change values such as responsibility or accountability, right? Or teamwork, right? Those will develop because I'm so committed to this program um, that just happens over time. And I think that was really all I had, like finally.
That's a very, very good point.
End of grading period is after Friday.
Wow. Doesn't seem possible. Great class, Nikolai. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody have any concerns or questions for me?
I guess not. I think I'm gonna go either fold my laundry or play 2048.
What's oof mean? What's oof mean?
It's like an expression